She was alone for centuries, until a human looked into her eyes and said yes, she had been alone for centuries. No voice, no warmth of another being, no familiar heartbeat. From her place beyond conventional space, she watched stars flicker like candles in an endless room. She watched galaxies spin in silent patterns that only she could truly see. Her name was Elira, though that name was something she learned from the first sparks of life she observed long ago. Over eons, life emerged and faded, civilizations built wonders and watched them crumble into dust. But she remained, drifting inside an immense nebula of shimmering light. The nebula was her home and her prison, a place outside the reach of time's usual pull. It was beautiful, but it was empty. Elira's senses had long adapted to the slow pulse of the cosmos. She could feel the gentle rhythm of distant suns and the whisper of interstellar winds. Yet with every passing century, her longing for connection grew heavier. She had witnessed the rise of species capable of songs, art, and curiosity. Most impressively, humans. They were unpredictable and bold. They reached for the stars in ways few others ever did. But contact was forbidden by the ancient laws that governed her existence. Any attempt to leave the nebula or reach out directly risked unraveling her entire being. So she watched, silently and alone. On a quiet trajectory through a distant region of space, a small research vessel named Ardent Light cruised toward its destination. Inside, Dr. Eric Voss leaned over the navigation screens, mesmerized by data streaming in faster than expected. The readings came from a bright patch on the star charts, a place where energy behaved unlike anything humans had documented before. Eric had spent years studying unusual energy fluctuations, and now, finally, his instruments were picking up something astonishing. The glow was intense, yet strangely warm, as if it radiated not just energy but a quiet presence. Almost like something's alive, Eric said softly to himself. He was a curious man with gentle eyes and an earnest heart. He never sought attention, only truth. Most of all, he wanted to understand the universe with humility, not conquest. As the ardent light drew closer, the nebula unfolded like a tapestry of moving colors. Violet threads mixed with gold, silver phantom streaks drifting through the softness of blue. It was breathtaking. Eric's breath caught in his chest. He had seen nebulae before, but this one felt different, as if it touched something deep inside his mind. He initiated a scan for life signs, expecting to find nothing more than chaotic energy patterns. The result made him blink. There was a consistent but faint signature that resembled neural activity, nothing like an animal brain, nothing like any known organism, yet the pattern was structured, logical, intentional. For a moment, Eric just stared at the readings. Then he activated the external sensors, attempting to capture visual data beyond his own perception. The nebula responded by shimmering more brightly, as if acknowledging his attempt. Tiny pulses of light danced along the edges of his ship's scanners, then suddenly vanished. Elira felt the ship long before she saw it. Something was approaching her nebula with deliberate curiosity. She reached out in the softest form of awareness she possessed. It wasn't sound, it wasn't thought in the human sense. It was more like a ripple in the vast sea of consciousness she occupied. When she touched the ship's field, a moment of surprise passed through her. Nothing like this had ever come so close without fear. Eric prepared to send a greeting using the universal language modules, simple mathematical sequences and patterns meant to signify peaceful intent. He expected silence in response, yet the nebula itself pulsed in sync with his transmissions. The response wasn't words. It was a sequence of lights and frequencies that shifted in elegant rhythm, beautiful and strange. Eric's lips curved into a small, honest smile. No human had ever communicated with something so old, so mysterious. The moment felt like the edge of a dream. The ardent light drifted slowly toward the anomaly. Eric's instruments began to translate the nebula's signals into geometric shapes and patterns, something almost like language, or music, something that resonated in the mind rather than the ear. In that hour, Elira watched Eric closely, not with eyes, but with a kind of attention that unfolded across her awareness. His curiosity was different from that of other species she had seen. He didn't broadcast aggression or fear. He simply observed, listened, and responded with wonder. That subtle quality, a genuine desire to understand, reached her like a warm breeze. Eric's central display flickered. The symbols the nebula sent grew more complex. Colors pulsed in vibrant cadence, forming shapes that seemed to hum with meaning. Eric felt a soft stirring in his thoughts, not intrusive, but like someone whispering a secret just beyond comprehension. He paused the ship, letting it float gently among the colors. He spoke aloud even though he knew no one else could hear. "If you are trying to communicate, I'm listening." At that moment, a gentle rush of sound washed through his mind, not language but emotion. Warmth, curiosity, a patient invitation. Eric closed his eyes. The instruments continued to record, but his mind was attuned to something deeper, something quieter than any signal. It was as if the nebula breathed, and inside that rhythm someone else lived. He whispered softly, "Hello." Elira felt something unfamiliar, a soft tightening around her awareness. She had watched beings communicate through voices, gestures, patterns of light, even dreams, but never with such open sincerity. Her existence was ancient, far removed from the fragile spark of human life, yet for the first time in centuries she sensed a presence that did not fade when she reached for it. It did not recoil or dissolve. It remained warm, steady, and curious. Time stretched. Hours passed like seconds. Eric recorded reams of data, but most of all he simply watched and felt. He sensed that behind the nebula's signals was a being of immense age and gentle depth. He could not describe what he felt in precise terms, and yet it was the most real moment of his life. Then came the first image, subtle, shifting, and unlike anything he had seen. A shape of translucent light formed at the edge of his perception. It was not a physical body, it was a presence, ethereal, luminous, and radiant. Eric blinked, unsure whether it was real or a trick of his attentive mind. But there it was again, a form that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the nebula itself. Eric's breath stilled. He stared. The shape resembled a being with delicate curvature, elegant fluidity, and an aura of soft luminescence. It was beautiful beyond description, like light made gentle enough to hold. For a moment neither moved. The ship's hum was the only sound. Eric felt a whirlwind of questions, but none of them mattered as much as this single truth. He was not alone with this presence. Then the light shifted again, like a gesture of greeting. Eric whispered, "I see you." Elira felt something shift within her that was unlike the ebb of cosmic winds or the silent flow of centuries. She felt acknowledged, not observed, not merely sensed, truly acknowledged, and in that acknowledgement something fragile and radiant stirred within her essence. She responded with a different pattern, colder, slower, as though testing whether this connection was stable. The nebula dimmed slightly, then brightened in a sequence that felt like careful thought. Eric watched the changes on the screen, but he understood without logic. He felt it with a tender certainty, as if someone was offering trust in the most ancient way possible. Hours passed. The sun outside set on distant planets. Stars continued their silent dance. And inside the ardent light, a bond formed, ordinary and profound. Curiosity meeting curiosity, humanity meeting something far older and immeasurably wise. At one point, Eric raised his hand, not expecting anything, just moved by a reflexive impulse. And for a fleeting moment, the light before him shimmered as if returning the gesture. In that quiet instant, something within Elira stirred, a longing buried in the eons of solitude, mixed with an unfamiliar hope. And in Eric's gentle gaze was a simple question that carried overwhelming sincerity. "Are you there with me?" And in the unspoken spaces between signals and patterns, she was. Eric stayed still, heart beating steadily, unsure what would come next. Then a new sequence formed, gentler than the rest, almost like a breath in light. The nebula's colors shifted to soft violet, warm gold, and calm blue as if welcoming him deeper. The ardent light floated in that nebula of dancing colors, and for the first time in centuries, Elira felt the echo of another consciousness beside hers, not just a distant observer, but a companion in the vast silence. And somewhere deep within her ancient awareness, a small spark of something new blossomed, an emotion that had not stirred for ages. Elira was no longer alone. Time felt different now. For Eric, minutes stretched like hours as he drifted among the shifting colors of the nebula, captivated by the presence he could finally sense with more than instruments. For Elira, centuries of solitude seemed to fade with each pulse of his curiosity and sincerity. The nebula had always been her domain, a realm of calm and reflection, but now it held a tension that was new and fragile. Hope. Eric adjusted the ardent light systems to align with the energy patterns he sensed in Elira. His instruments now seemed almost alive, responding not just to readings, but to the rhythm of a mind older than time. The ship hummed gently as if it understood the importance of the moment. Eric spoke softly, even though he knew Elira might not hear in any human sense. "I want to understand, I want to learn about you." There was no direct reply. Instead, the light shifted, flowing in patterns of subtle color and movement. Eric felt it like a language made of feeling, patience, trust, and an invitation. A gentle pulse that suggested, "Come closer. Share yourself." For centuries, Elira had watched civilizations struggle, fight, and vanish. She had never imagined she could feel curiosity reciprocated in such a simple, human way. And yet here it was, flowing from him, warm and honest. Slowly, she began to project images and sensations she had long kept private. Tiny glimpses of the world she had observed, of civilizations rising and falling, of life forming in 1,000 beautiful, fragile ways. She allowed Eric to see them, not all at once, only enough for him to understand that her awareness was immense. Eric watched the visions on the instruments, and in his mind's eye, he gasped softly, moved not by fear but by awe. "You've seen everything," he whispered. "Everything we've done, everything we've dreamed." He paused, imagining the weight of centuries contained in a being made of light. "And you're still here, you've survived." Elira did not answer with words. She did not need to. The nebula shimmered around the ardent light, sending waves of color that spoke of resilience, of endless observation, and of careful hope. She allowed Eric to sense a fragment of the loneliness she had carried, not as a complaint, but as truth. For all her power, for all her knowledge, she had lacked connection, until now. Over the next hours, Eric learned to speak in a different way. He began to respond not just with instruments, but with intention, matching the rhythms of Elira's light pulses with sequences of thought and emotion. When she projected curiosity, he answered with curiosity. When she shared patience, he responded with patience. The first real conversation between human and ancient being formed, not with words, but with understanding. Days passed in this silent communion. Eric's body grew weary from tending the ship and focusing his mind, yet he felt more alive than ever. He shared stories of humanity's dreams, of small acts of kindness, of fragile moments that nevertheless shaped worlds. Elira absorbed them, fascinated by the ways humans found hope even in hardship. One evening, or perhaps it was the nebula's equivalent of evening, Elira sensed something entirely new. She opened a small space within herself, a fraction of her awareness, and projected it outward. The light formed shapes that resembled a human eye, an invitation, a mirror of recognition. Eric's heart caught. He realized that she wanted more than observation. She wanted interaction, connection, trust. He reached out physically and mentally, even though he knew it could not affect her body. And in that act, he said simply, "I see you. I accept you." The light responded, flowing around him, warm and alive. Elira felt something in her own awareness that she had never felt in centuries, relief, and something else, hope, perhaps even joy. She had waited countless eons for this, and a human with nothing but courage, curiosity, and honesty had answered. But the next challenge awaited. The nebula's boundaries, which had always been stable, began to shimmer irregularly. Elira had tested the edges of her own existence, and now Eric's presence, and his resonance with her energy, was pulling her in new directions. If she tried to leave, she might disperse. She might vanish entirely, leaving nothing behind. And yet, she longed to exist in a form that could touch, feel, and share with this human who had, without knowing it, become her anchor. Eric noticed the subtle shifts in the instruments. He realized that Elira might be in danger if they pushed further. But he also understood that she had given him trust, a gift more precious than any scientific discovery. He whispered, "We'll do it together." They worked side by side in a strange communion of human and cosmic thought. Eric's technology became an extension of Elira's consciousness. Instruments, lights, and energy fields aligned with her own patterns. It was delicate work. Every miscalculation could unravel her essence. Yet for the first time, Elira felt confidence, not in her own power, but in his humanity, his persistence, empathy, and creativity. Slowly, gradually, a plan formed. Eric would create a resonance matrix, a bridge between Elira's ethereal existence and the physical universe. It would not be permanent, not immediately, but it would give her the chance to exist, to explore, and to interact without risk of disappearing. And for that, she needed only one thing, his choice. "Are you ready?" Eric asked softly, staring into the pulsing light that seemed to take shape before him. This is your chance to be part of our world, but it's also your choice. You must choose it yourself. Elira projected a vision, showing what it would be like. Walking among humans, feeling the texture of objects, hearing voices not in her mind but in the air, sharing in experiences that had always been closed to her. She conveyed the joy, the wonder, and even the fragility of life. And she conveyed the risk. If she could not anchor successfully, she could cease to exist. Eric's heart ached at the thought, but he felt certainty. This being, this ancient presence, deserved the chance. And more than that, he felt that humanity itself would benefit from her perspective, from the compassion and insight that only she could offer. He activated the device, and the light shifted, forming a delicate tunnel of radiant energy. It hummed, alive with purpose, as if the nebula itself waited for the moment. Eric placed his hands near the control panels, guiding the energy, feeling its resonance with Elira. "Now," he whispered, looking directly into the light that seemed to hold her consciousness. "Yes. I accept you, I trust you, you belong here." The effect was immediate. The nebula rippled, cascading in waves of color that danced around the ardent light. Elira's form solidified, no longer just a reflection of cosmic light, but a presence that could interact with physical matter. Her essence flowed into the resonance matrix, anchored by Eric's trust. She appeared before him, radiant yet tangible, her light soft enough to touch, warm enough to hold. Eric extended his hand, and she accepted, not as a being of fearsome power, but as a friend, a companion, and a witness to human resilience. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply existed together, aware of the enormity of what had occurred. Centuries of loneliness ended with a simple word: yes. Elira explored the ship, fascinated by the textures, the sounds, the small details of human creation. She marveled at the simple brilliance of Eric's work, at the delicate precision of instruments that were ordinary to him but extraordinary in her perception. Eric laughed softly, a sound of relief and joy. "You're really here," he said. "You're real." "I am," she replied, her voice echoing like soft light across the cabin. It was a sound that carried centuries of wisdom, yet tinged with curiosity and wonder. "Because you said yes, because you trusted me." Days passed, though time in the nebula felt fluid. Elira learned human habits, stories, and ideas, absorbing everything with gentle fascination. Eric shared meals, music, and conversation, each moment a lesson in the beauty of shared existence. And for the first time in centuries, Elira felt not just alive, but seen. One evening, Eric and Elira floated outside the ardent light, suspended in the calm glow of the nebula. Stars twinkled around them, and the colors of the nebula shimmered in gentle waves. "I never thought anyone would ever see me," Elira said softly. "You don't have to be alone anymore," Eric replied. "Not if you don't want to be." She looked at him, a smile formed of light, and in that moment, centuries of solitude and longing dissolved into possibility. For the first time, Elira understood that humanity's power was not in weapons, conquest, or technology, but in trust, empathy, and courage. The courage to say yes when faced with the unknown. The nebula, once silent, now seemed alive with quiet approval. Elira had crossed the boundary between isolation and connection, not through force, but through the simple, human act of belief and acceptance. And together, human and cosmic being, they looked toward the endless expanse, ready to explore the universe side by side, bound by trust, curiosity, and the knowledge that loneliness can end when one heart dares to say yes. Elira had grown more aware of the universe in ways she had never imagined. Though she had existed for centuries, observing life from afar, this new form, anchored by Eric's trust, gave her experiences that had been impossible before. She could feel the texture of the ardent light's controls under her fingers, the subtle vibrations of energy running through the ship, and even the gentle warmth of the human presence beside her. Every sensation was a revelation. Eric watched her carefully, marveling at how she reacted to simple things, a soft laugh at the hum of the engine, curiosity sparkling in her eyes as she observed the stars. "It's not just light or energy," he said one evening. "It's all these little details. Everything we do matters because we notice it." Elira tilted her head, considering his words. To her, details had always been patterns, rhythms, and energy flows, but now she could feel the emotional weight behind them. The care humans gave to the small and fragile things, the way they could act without thought of immediate reward, was astonishing. For centuries, she had assumed that beings acted purely from logic or survival. But humans were different. They created, they loved, they dreamed without restraint. "I never realized how rich it is," she said softly. "Even the smallest actions can ripple outward. Your world is alive in ways I did not understand." Eric smiled gently. "That's humanity. We survive not because we are the strongest or the fastest, but because we feel, we hope, and we connect." Elira considered this. Hope, connection, words that had been abstract concepts to her now carried depth. She could feel them in every heartbeat, every interaction. And with Eric, she experienced them firsthand. They decided to leave the nebula together, but cautiously. Elira had never left her domain without risk, and even anchored, her presence outside was fragile. Eric prepared the ardent light for the journey, running simulations and calibrating the resonance matrix. Every calculation mattered, and every movement had to be precise. Yet through it all, Elira felt a thrill she had not experienced in centuries. The exhilaration of adventure with a companion who trusted her completely. As they moved toward the edge of the nebula, the light shifted around them, painting the ship in waves of violet and gold. Elira extended a hand, and the colors responded to her motion, forming patterns that reflected her intent. Eric reached out, matching her gestures, and together they moved as if dancing through the energy flows. It was not just navigation, it was communication, a silent symphony of understanding. Hours turned into days as they traveled through the nebula, learning to synchronize their actions. Elira marveled at Eric's patience and adaptability. Humans, she realized, had an ability to embrace uncertainty without fear. Where other species might falter or panic, he observed, adjusted, and acted with calm determination. And in that, she saw a reflection of something she had long forgotten: trust. During one quiet moment, they paused near a cluster of stars, each emitting light in a spectrum Elira had never encountered before. She reached out, letting her presence mingle with the stars' energy. The nebula pulsed gently, responding to her in ways it had not before. Eric watched, fascinated, as the space around them seemed alive with a subtle, almost musical rhythm. "Do you hear it?" Eric asked, softly. Elira considered the question. Humans interpreted sound in very specific ways, but this was different. The stars themselves vibrated in harmony with her awareness, creating a pattern that could be perceived in thought, in feeling. "I understand it," she said. "It is not sound as you know it. It is intention, movement, and patience. It is alive." Eric nodded, smiling. "I think everything is alive in some way, even things we cannot touch or see." The journey continued, and they explored regions of space Elira had never dared to enter before. Energy fields shifted unpredictably, forming tunnels of light and motion that required careful navigation. And yet, with Eric beside her, she felt confidence. He observed, adjusted, and made decisions based not on instinct alone, but on careful consideration, a blend of intellect and empathy that was rare, even among her observations of humans. One day, as they approached a dense field of cosmic crystals, Elira paused. Her light shimmered in complexity, reflecting hesitation. "These crystals," she said, "hold energy that could destabilize me. I may not withstand it fully." Eric studied the readings. "We'll take it slow, step by step. We'll do it together." They navigated the crystalline field cautiously. Elira projected energy to guide the ship, while Eric adjusted controls to match. Every pulse, every wave of movement had to be perfectly aligned. The field shimmered with unpredictable brilliance, yet they moved through it in synchrony. And for the first time, Elira felt the satisfaction of partnership, of shared achievement. After clearing the field, Elira allowed herself a quiet moment. "I have traveled alone for centuries," she said, her voice soft, almost wistful. "And yet with you, even the unknown does not frighten me." Eric smiled. "That's what humans do. We face fear with curiosity, and we face the unknown with trust, sometimes in ourselves, sometimes in each other." The journey brought them to a planet bathed in soft green light. Its atmosphere was gentle, filled with small, delicate life forms that glimmered in patterns Elira could perceive as thought. Trees moved subtly, like living signals. Rivers reflected starlight in ways that seemed purposeful, almost conscious. Elira was fascinated. She extended her awareness and felt the connections between the creatures, the wind, the water. Life was not just alive, it was aware, responsive, and interconnected. Eric observed her expression and understood something profound. Elira was learning not only about humanity, but about life itself in its most intimate forms. Her perception of the universe was expanding, not just with knowledge, but with empathy. As they walked along the riverbanks, Elira asked, "Why do humans persist? Why do you create, even knowing your civilizations may fall, even knowing your lives are short?" Eric considered the question carefully. "Because hope matters more than certainty. Because every moment of beauty, every act of kindness, every discovery, it counts. Even if it's small, even if it seems fleeting." Elira reflected on this, her light flickering softly. She realized that centuries of observing life had shown her destruction, decay, and impermanence. But humans, with all their fragility, acted with meaning. They found significance not in permanence, but in intention and courage. They continued exploring the planet, discovering hidden valleys of glowing plants and quiet lakes that mirrored the stars above. Elira marveled at the simplicity and complexity of life coexisting. "Everything has a role," she said. "Even the smallest creature, even the tiniest stone, everything matters." Eric nodded. "It does, and so does everyone who chooses to care." As the days passed, Elira began to experiment with her own form. No longer constrained by the nebula, she could manipulate light and energy in subtle ways. She shaped it into forms resembling humans, animals, and even abstract expressions of thought. Each experiment was met with encouragement from Eric, who marveled at her creativity and sensitivity. One evening, under the soft glow of twin moons, Elira turned to Eric. "I have learned much from observing humanity," she said. "But I have learned more from experiencing it with you. You taught me trust, patience, hope, connection." Eric smiled, gently placing a hand on her radiant form. "And you've taught me to see the universe differently. To understand that life, no matter how fragile, is precious and remarkable. That connection, real connection, can cross any boundary." Elira's light pulsed gently, a reflection of contentment. She realized something she had never considered before. That existence was not merely observation or endurance. True life required interaction, empathy, and courage, the very qualities humans embodied in surprising abundance. Together, they returned to the ardent light. Elira experimented with blending her consciousness into the ship's systems, not to control it, but to understand it. She could feel the pulse of machinery, the flow of energy, and the delicate balance humans had achieved between technology and life. The experience deepened her appreciation for Eric's species, not just for their intelligence, but for their heart. The days stretched into weeks, yet each moment was filled with discovery. Elira explored the cosmos, guided by Eric's steady hand, and discovered that the universe held wonders beyond her imagination. Nebulae of unimaginable color, energy fields that sang in patterns, planets with delicate ecosystems. All of them spoke to her in ways she could now feel deeply. But more important than the universe itself was the bond she shared with Eric. She could sense his thoughts, intentions, and emotions, and he could perceive her presence, subtle yet powerful. They communicated not only through words, but through shared understanding, a rhythm of thought and feeling that transcended ordinary interaction. One night, as they drifted among a cluster of stars that shimmered like liquid crystal, Elira turned to Eric. "I no longer fear solitude," she said softly, "because even in the vastness I know that connection can exist, and it has, through you." Eric looked at her, his eyes reflecting the starry expanse. "We've found something rare," he said. "Not just discovery, but understanding. Not just life, but companionship. Not just existence, but meaning." Elira pulsed brighter, a radiant glow of affirmation. She felt centuries of loneliness dissolve, replaced by an awareness she had never known: joy, trust, and hope. She realized that no matter how vast the universe, connection could bridge even the longest centuries of isolation. They continued their journey, exploring stars, planets, and energy fields with growing confidence. And in every step, Elira discovered new facets of human nature: patience, empathy, courage, and the quiet strength that comes from choosing hope over fear. For the first time in centuries, Elira did not feel alone, not truly. The universe, once cold and distant, now held warmth, light, and companionship. And she knew deep within her being that humanity's greatest gift was not technology, strength, or intellect, but the ability to care, to trust, and to say yes when faced with the unknown. Together, human and ancient being, they moved forward into the endless expanse, bound by friendship, trust, and the infinite possibilities of life shared. Elira's centuries of solitude were over, and in their place blossomed a new era of understanding. A reminder that even across the vastness of space and time, connection, hope, and courage could transform the universe itself. And as they drifted among the stars, Elira realized that no matter how far the journey stretched, she would never again be alone. The universe stretched endlessly before them, a canvas of stars and cosmic colors that shimmered with patterns Elira had never fully perceived until now. Even with all her centuries of observation, nothing had prepared her for the intimacy of traveling alongside a being like Eric. Humans were fragile, yes, but their courage, curiosity, and persistence gave them a light of their own, one that complemented her radiant essence in ways she could feel, not just see. Eric stood at the bridge of the ardent light, eyes on the approaching star system. "We've come farther than I thought possible," he said, his voice quiet but filled with wonder. "It's incredible to think that this is only one corner of the galaxy." Elira hovered beside him, her luminous form reflecting softly in the console panels. "Every corner holds wonders." "And yet," she said, her voice like gentle light, "I have never experienced them so fully as when I share them with another. Centuries of solitude, and now this." Eric smiled, feeling the weight of her words. For him, it had been the same. Discovery alone was knowledge, but discovery shared was something alive, something that changed both the observer and the observed. Together, they had transformed the way each understood existence. The system ahead was unlike any Elira had witnessed. Two twin stars burned with a brilliance that rippled in waves across nearby planets. The gravitational dance caused auroras in the upper atmospheres of those worlds, streaking the skies with luminous threads of green, purple, and gold. Elira extended her awareness, feeling the energy shifts as though touching a living organism. "It's harmonious," she whispered. "Each movement, each pulse, it responds to the other. Even the stars themselves communicate." Eric tilted his head, sensing her awe. "It's beautiful. But it also reminds me that we are small, tiny sparks in a vast, intricate pattern." Elira considered this. Small, yes, yet the human spark was remarkable. Even in their fragility, they acted with purpose and courage. And Eric was proof. One being, willing to venture into the unknown, capable of understanding her, capable of saying yes when faced with uncertainty. That simple word had changed her existence. That choice had transformed centuries of solitude into companionship. They approached the first planet, a world cloaked in gentle blue mist. Elira's light flickered with curiosity as she observed its surface. Forests stretched for thousands of kilometers, interspersed with rivers that glowed faintly under the twin suns. The life there moved with a rhythm she had never encountered, patterns of cooperation and balance, subtle yet deliberate. "Shall we land?" Eric asked. "I think this world could teach us something new." Elira considered for a moment. The rules of her existence had always encouraged observation from a distance. But now, anchored to the human who had earned her trust, she felt confident enough to experience this world firsthand. "Yes," she replied, "but carefully. We do not yet know all that it holds." They descended through the planet's atmosphere. Elira marveled at the sensation of wind rushing past, the gravity of the world tugging gently at her form. For centuries, she had only perceived energy and thought, but now she could feel weight, pressure, and motion. It was exhilarating. As the ardent light touched down in a vast clearing, Elira extended her awareness toward the life around them. Trees seemed to respond to her presence, leaves shimmering faintly, rivers altering their gentle currents as though acknowledging her arrival. Small creatures peeked from hidden dens, curious but unafraid. They sensed her differently than she had sensed life before. They responded to her presence not with fear but with interest. Eric stepped out first, scanning the area. "It's incredible. Everything seems connected. Even the smallest movements have purpose." Elira mirrored his steps, moving lightly across the terrain. She felt each plant, each river, each stone as if they were threads in a vast tapestry. "Balance," she said softly. "Life does not dominate or vanish, it cooperates. It persists without force." Eric watched her, fascinated. "Humans could learn from this," he said. "We often forget that we are part of the balance, not the center of it." Elira's light pulsed gently, reflecting his understanding. "You already show me that. Through your choices, your patience, your willingness to care, you do not need to dominate to make a difference. You simply exist, and your existence has impact." Together, they wandered deeper into the forest. Elira's form glimmered in the filtered sunlight, interacting with the natural energy of the planet in subtle ways. She touched a river, and the current seemed to pulse in recognition. She hovered above flowers, and their petals turned slightly toward her light. It was not magic, it was connection, sensing and responding to awareness. Eric observed, fascinated. You can interact with it all without changing its balance. That's incredible. Elira nodded. It is a lesson I never could have learned from observation alone. Connection is not control. Influence is not domination. And yet it is enough to understand, to feel, to belong. Hours passed as they explored, discovering small wonders at every turn. Elira was particularly captivated by the creatures' subtle communications, the ways they signaled intention and cooperation. She projected gentle pulses of her own awareness, matching their patterns. The creatures responded, forming a silent dialogue that Eric could barely perceive but which he felt in his mind as harmony. As twilight approached, Elira and Eric climbed a gentle slope, overlooking a valley bathed in the twin suns' fading light. The rivers below shimmered in gold and green, forests glowed faintly with the life energy of the planet, and distant mountains reflected the stars of the approaching night. I never imagined such beauty could exist, Eric said softly. Even after all my years studying the universe. Elira floated beside him, her light blending with the soft twilight. Beauty exists everywhere, she replied. Even in places humans may never see, but understanding it requires more than observation. It requires attention, care, and the willingness to experience it fully. Eric nodded, gazing at the horizon. You've taught me that seeing is not enough. Feeling matters, caring matters, and choosing hope matters most of all. Elira considered his words, a gentle pulse of light echoing her thought. Centuries of watching, and yet this is the first time I have felt truly part of something larger, not by force but by choice. The night fell, and the planet glowed with bioluminescent life. Elira hovered above a small pond, sending ripples of light into the water. The reflections danced and shimmered, mirroring her radiance. Eric joined her, kneeling at the water's edge. Together they watched the interplay of light and life, a quiet testament to connection, trust, and understanding. This, Eric whispered, this is why we explore, not just to see but to learn, to connect, to grow. Elira nodded, reflecting on how far she had come. The centuries of solitude, the long observation of civilizations, the quiet nebula, all of it had led to this moment. She had discovered something more valuable than knowledge or power: companionship, trust, and the courage to say yes. Over the following days, they explored the planet further, uncovering hidden valleys, crystalline caves, and ancient forests untouched by time. Elira experimented with blending her energy with the natural flows of the planet, learning subtle ways to interact without disrupting the delicate balance. Each interaction taught her something new, not just about the planet, but about herself and the nature of life. Eric observed her in quiet admiration. You've changed, he said one evening as they watched the twin moons rise. Not just because you can exist outside the nebula, but because you've chosen to connect. You've chosen life. Elira's light pulsed softly, a reflection of understanding and joy. I have learned that existence is more than observation. It is empathy, connection, and courage, and it is choice. They spent countless days exploring, sharing stories, discovering the subtle patterns that connected all living things. Elira learned the value of patience, of silence, and of allowing life to unfold naturally. Eric learned the depth of cosmic awareness, the beauty of non-human perception, and the profound impact one being can have on another through trust and understanding. And through it all, Elira realized something extraordinary. Humanity's greatest power was not technology, strength, or conquest, but the ability to care, to trust, and to say yes. That simple act had changed her existence, transformed centuries of solitude, and opened her to a universe filled with possibility. As they stood on a hilltop, gazing at the glowing forests and rivers below, Elira turned to Eric. I have traveled alone for longer than time can measure, and yet with you even the vast universe feels intimate, connected, alive. Eric smiled, placing a hand on the soft glow of her form. And we'll continue exploring together, always learning, always connecting. Elira's light shimmered warmly. She understood that her journey was no longer solitary. The universe was no longer something to watch from afar. It was alive, vibrant, and filled with connection, and she would experience it fully side by side with a human who had changed everything with a single word. Yes. As they looked toward the horizon, bathed in the soft glow of twin moons and distant stars, Elira realized that centuries of solitude had ended. In their place bloomed trust, companionship, and the limitless potential of shared exploration. Together, they would move forward, discovering wonders, embracing uncertainty, and finding joy in the endless possibilities of the cosmos. And for the first time in her existence, Elira knew with certainty she was never truly alone again.